Hello, friends.
Welcome to episode 10 of our podcast, Kidsplorers. We're so excited that you're joining us on our journey to explore and discover new things. You might remember that in our last episode, we learned all about bees. We had a chance to visit Professor Smartypants, who was in New Zealand doing research on bees and honey. He helped us learn about why bees are important to all of us, how bees make honey, and what role they play in pollinating flowers. At the end of last week's episode, Isabella and Daniel suggested that we should learn about an important woman from the field of aviation. So guys, do you want to fill us in on our plan for today?
Of course. Some of you might know that March is Women's History Month. Since Isabella and I are really interested in airplanes and flying, we thought it would be awesome to explore one of the first women in aviation history.
That's right. We will be learning about Amelia Earhart.
Isabella, do you know much about her?
I really don't, but I remember you mentioning her a few times. So I thought it would be great to learn more about her.
I'm very excited to learn about Amelia Earhart. She was definitely a trailblazer and lived at a time when she had to change a lot of people's ideas about what women could do in order to accomplish everything that she has accomplished. Breaking down these ideas meant that future generations of women had an easier journey in the field of aviation.
You mentioned the word aviation a few times, but I don't know what it means.
Aviation is a word that describes everything to do with airplanes, including things like designing, building, and fixing aircrafts, flying airplanes, and much more.
I know that we are all very used to seeing lots of airplanes in the sky these days, but this was very different 100 years ago. If we actually think back to episode 8, when we explored the RMS Titanic, we will realize that most people of the time traveled by oceans on ships, as opposed to airplanes. This is because around this time, airplanes were not advanced enough to transport people across the ocean, so most people relied on the ships for such journey.
You're absolutely right. Aviation was really just starting to develop at this time. In fact, the first airplanes that were built were glider aircrafts and looked far different from the airplanes you see today.
Wait, what is a glider?
Gliders are aircrafts that do not have an engine.
But how can they fly without an engine?
Great question. Gliders rely on air currents and winds to lift them and move them around. I really wish that Professor Smartypants was here to explain this topic. He told me that he flew in a glider once, and he could explain this much better.
Where is Professor Smartypants?
Could it be him? That would be perfect timing.
Let me check. It's Professor Smartypants. Hi, Professor.
Hello, friends. I'm so sorry I'm late. I was trying my best to get here as quickly as possible.
Hello, Professor. Come on in.
Professor, tell us everything. Mommy started telling us about gliders, but we still don't really understand what they are.
Great. It sounds like I came just in time. But before we talk about gliders, I actually want to tell you guys about a really cool animal.
Professor, you sound confused. We're learning about Amelia Earhart today.
Bear with me. I want to tell you about an animal called the flying squirrel, because it will help us understand glider airplanes better.
Wait, you mean squirrels can fly? Next you'll tell us that fish can fly.
Actually, some fish do fly. But I want to focus on these awesome squirrels for now. You see, flying squirrels don't exactly fly like birds or planes. These squirrels are different from some of the squirrels you've seen because they are born with extra long skin between the front and back legs. This means that when they jump from a tall place like a tree, this extra skin gives them this awesome ability to glide or almost float in the air. It looks like they are wearing a parachute.
Wait, but a parachute is something people use when they are parachuting off an airplane.
That's right. Another example of gliding animals is the raptor birds, like eagles, hawks, vultures, and falcons. Gliding helps them conserve energy.
That makes sense. We see eagles near our house all the time. When we see them, their wings are spread out, and it looks like the wind carries them in the direction they want to go.
And that's exactly what gliding is. So imagine an aircraft that moves only because the wind carries it. It has no engine to give it the energy it needs to fly on its own. Those first airplanes looked far different than today's airplanes and were not successful at all.
But in 1903, everything changed. That year, two brothers named Orville and Wilburn Wright built the first powered aircraft. This successful flight got many people interested in aviation. The more people started to get involved in the construction of airplanes, the quicker airplanes started to improve. Eventually, airplanes were built with more complex engines.
That's right. With all these changes, there was suddenly a huge public interest in aviation. So much so that special flying exhibitions were organized to allow regular people to watch pilots flying their planes. In 1918, such an exhibition was held in Canada, where Amelia Earhart was working at the time as a nurse's aide. Like many others, she attended and...
Let me guess. She became obsessed with becoming a pilot.
That's exactly what happened.
I've always wondered what it would be like to fly like a bird. I understand why Amelia Earhart wanted to become a pilot.
She definitely became very curious about flying an aircraft, but she actually did not always dream of this.
That's right. Amelia Earhart was born on July 24, 1897, in Atchison, Kansas, which is in the United States. During this time, women had very different possibilities than men. Women were expected to become mothers and wives and were often discouraged from getting an education or a job. But lucky for us, Amelia and her sister Muriel did not like this plan. From a young age, they both loved climbing trees, riding horses, reading books, and so much more.
This reminds me of me and Isabella.
Oh yes, we love climbing everywhere.
You guys are both very adventurous, which I love about you. But now imagine if you were told that you couldn't do this just because you were a girl.
That would be so unfair.
I agree. It really wouldn't be fair. In the case of our main character today, Amelia felt very strongly about being able to do whatever she enjoyed doing. And thankfully, her parents allowed her and her sister to do those things. I think the world of aviation would have lost a lot had Amelia not been allowed to be so adventurous from a young age.
Absolutely. It is so important for kids to be curious. I always say that all kids are born scientists because they are constantly experimenting.
That's true. We love to experiment, but our experiments don't always end well.
They don't always, but I'm happy that you guys try different things. If people did not experiment and try new things, I think we would live in a very different world.
Absolutely. And Amelia did just that. She attended college for some time, then a university for medical studies, and later moved to our very own city, Toronto, to work as a nurse's aide. After attending the flying exhibition in Canada, which left a big impression on her, she returned to America with the goal of becoming a pilot. Her very first flight lesson took place in 1921. Her teacher was a woman pilot named Anita Snook. Just like Amelia, Anita Snook worked very hard to become a pilot and was excited to pass on her knowledge to other women who were interested in aviation.
About 6 months after starting flying lessons, Amelia Earhart borrowed some money from her mother and sister and bought her very first airplane. It was a second-hand Kinner Airster, which she named the Canary. That year, Amelia Earhart was unstoppable. She became so good at flying that she set a women's aviation record by reaching 14,000 feet in this airplane.
Wow, she learned to fly in 6 months and even set records. That's amazing.
It really is. But sadly, her lucky streak quickly came to a pause. As we discussed in previous episodes, the 1920s were difficult years in America. Many families lived in difficult conditions because people did not have enough money for daily life. Because of this, around this time, Amelia made the difficult decision of selling her airplane. She took a bit of a break from aviation and worked as a teacher and a social worker.
I can imagine that she couldn't wait to get back to the sky. It sounds like aviation was really her passion.
Absolutely. And as soon as she could, she got back on a plane. And she came back to aviation stronger and more determined than ever before. She broke many different records. For example, in 1928, Amelia Earhart became the first woman to fly alone across the North American continent and back. That same year, she became the first woman passenger to cross the Atlantic Ocean when she joined pilots Wilma Stultz and Louis Gordon on their flight from Newfoundland to Wales. And in 1931, she broke her own record when she reached an altitude of 18,415 feet.
Around this time, Amelia was working with a man named George Putnam. George was a publisher who was working to promote Amelia. This means that his job was to advertise who Amelia Earhart was and talk to people about her success. In the years that Amelia and George worked together, he actually asked her to marry him 6 times. Eventually, in the year 1931, George and Amelia finally got married.
At this time, it was expected of a woman to take their husband's last name, but Amelia Earhart decided that she would keep her own last name and she would continue to work on her career. She was very determined to be the first woman pilot to fly across the Atlantic Ocean alone. On May 20, 1932, a year after she married George Putnam, Amelia set off on another journey from Newfoundland, Canada to Northern Ireland. This trip was certainly not an easy one and took almost 15 hours to complete, but she succeeded.
This sounds like an incredible achievement. No wonder people around the world are still speaking of her accomplishments.
Absolutely. She had many different journeys in the upcoming years, but her last journey was one in which she planned to fly around the world. For this trip, she needed the help of a navigator, or a person who would assist her with directions and flight information. In May of 1937, Amelia and her navigator, Fred Noonan, started out on their journey.
They took off from Oakland, California, making several stops along the way. By July 2, 1937, they were on the last leg of their flight journey and made it as far as Lae in Papua New Guinea. That day, they headed out of their next flight to Howland Island in the Pacific Ocean. This stop would be very important for Amelia because that would be a place where she could refuel her aircraft. Unfortunately, on this day, the weather was not very good. The skies were overcast and there was quite a bit of rain.
There were other challenges for Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan. The island of Howland, where they meant to stop for fuel, was a very small island surrounded by miles and miles of water and no land in sight. After flying for 20 hours, they reached the area of this island and were in urgent need of refueling. Around the area of this island, a ship in the ocean was meant to greet them and help them navigate and refuel. Amelia was communicating with this ship at the time, explaining that her plane was in the area and that they could not find the island. Sadly, Amelia could not hear communication from the ship. At 8:43 a.m., the ship heard their last message from Amelia, after which there was radio silence.
When the plane failed to land on the island and no communication could be heard from Amelia, a rescue mission started. For a long time, both island in the area and the water were searched, but no trace of the plane, Amelia or Fred, were ever found.
Amelia left a big mystery behind, but I read that the biggest theory as to what happened to them is that they ran out of fuel and crashed into the ocean.
This is so sad.
It really is, but I think Amelia Earhart would want to be remembered for all her accomplishments and not her disappearance. She was a true feminist and thought that women should be able to do the same things as men. She's known for saying, "Women must try to do things as men have tried. When they fail, their failure must be a challenge to others." Her hard work has definitely allowed women to succeed in the field of aviation and work in different professions related to aviation.
Wow, I'm so impressed with her hard work.
Me too. She is definitely an important person in history that people should know about.
Absolutely. I'm really happy that we had a chance to learn about her. There are many powerful and important women in history who paved a path for the success of other women, but also, of course, the well-being of all people.
I agree. Mummy, I was wondering about a topic we could explore next week and thought about Neanderthals, which is a species of human before today's humans. We could explore this topic.
If you do, I would love to explore it with you. There is so much interesting information about how humans evolved and changed over the years.
Great, I love this topic. Friends, join us again next Sunday as we explore another important topic, which is the evolution of humans and the history of Neanderthals. Professor, thank you so much for helping us explore Amelia Earhart and all of aviation today. We really hope that you liked today's episode. We would be so excited if you would share our podcast with all your friends who you think would like to join us on our explorations. We always look forward to hearing from you about any feedback and suggestions for what you'd like us to explore in future episodes. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram by searching Kidexplorers Podcast. In the meantime, if you liked our episode today, we will be so excited if you could give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other platform that you listen to us on. It will mean so much to us. And this is it.